apparently.
I'll pick you up. That mic will pick you up.
Paramachalokadhipati sahampati Katanjali anadhivarang ayachata Santi dasata parajakajatika Te setu dhammang anukampimang pajang.
Okay, that was the Dhamma talk request. I'll wait for a couple more minutes while people continue to join in. I was reminded coming back in that technology is suffering. It wasn't behaving, so, but now it is. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So one of our Anagarkas has requested the Dhamma talk, the one Dhamma talk we'll give on this day-long retreat. And for Dhamma talks, it's good to just meditate to them. You can use them as a guided meditation. And Ajahn Mun, one of the founders of the Thai forest tradition, he would say that the Dhamma talk is to be used for the sake of peace. So if your mind is getting peaceful during the talk, then it's doing its work. So one doesn't have to actually memorize everything that's being said or even take notes, although taking notes might be helpful for some people. More often than not, taking notes is going to detract from what's being said because you can't really focus on what you're writing and what's being said at the same time, and so you might miss something. But if we just sit and listen and let it go in, and things that speak to us, things that affect us, they will go in if we're listening, if we're attentive. And it's not the case that we need to memorize it or remember everything that was said, but just that the feeling tone of listening to a talk is that one becomes peaceful and content. That's the function of the Dhamma talk. So Ajahn Mun would give a talk, and you'd hear about monks becoming peaceful. But some of the monks would be nervous around him while he was giving a talk. Maybe he'd be pointing out people's hidden faults, because that's what a great teacher does. They point out the hidden faults. When we say faults, that means obstructions to peacefulness, obstructions to happiness. Anything that's an obstruction to happiness or a cause of suffering, the Buddha would class as a fault. And so he would want us to either eradicate our faults or get rid of our faults, not because he's judging us, but because those faults are obstructions to happiness and are causes of suffering for ourselves. And so that's the very reason we try to rectify our behavior. We took the 5 precepts earlier today, and those are things that help to make the mind peaceful. The keeping of precepts, virtuous behavior, generosity. There was the meal offering earlier today, so that's generosity. That generosity is a great cause for happiness. And so the Dhamma talk was requested, and we don't proselytize. We don't have missionary work that we do. We don't go out and try to spread the good word and go out outside of the monastery and walking down the street in the town and you guys don't the Dhamma is amazing. You don't even understand. Keep the precepts. And if you were to talk like that, it would just push people away from wanting to practice Buddhism. So we only teach when requested. And when requested, that means somebody wants to actually hear what we're going to say. And we're not forcing ourselves on others. Somebody actually wants to hear what we have to say. So they say, oh, it's like the story of Venerable Assaji, one of the first 5 disciples of the Buddha. And Sariputta, who was not a monk yet, his name was Upatissa. And he was a layman. I mean, he was actually engaged in spiritual practices already. But technically he was a layman. So Upatissa was Sariputta's lay name. So Upatissa was wandering, and he came to a village and saw a monk on alms round carrying his bowl, and he had his robes on beautifully and was walking a correct pace, walking the right pace, not too fast, not too slow, not looking around everywhere, but eyes downcast, beautiful in his conduct, beautiful in his deportment, and he was very inspired by seeing the Venerable Assaji. And so he actually went down and wanted to speak with him. He said, "You're very impressive. Can you give me some teachings?" And he said, "Well, I'm on alms round." Venerable Assaji replied that he was on alms round. Can't really give teachings right then. But then Upatissa said, "Well, can you give me a summary of the teachings?" And Venerable Assaji said, "Well, I'm just a beginner, but my teacher is the Buddha, and he teaches that of all compounded things having arisen, they must cease. And that is the true nature of things." And so that's all he said. And that was enough for Upatissa to open the eye of Dhamma, attain stream entry. And so Venerable Asaji, this is a story that he was actually spreading Dhamma just through his conduct, through his example, not having to say anything. And he's the one who's lifted up a lot in the Thai forest tradition, as that's how we are supposed to conduct ourselves, just keep the precepts, cultivate upright behavior, good conduct, wear our robes properly, and so on. And that is a teaching in and of itself. We don't have to actually say very much. But then when requested, when prodded, when pushed, yes, we can say a few words about the Dhamma, about the practice. And he's also got that humility. He says he's a beginner. He was actually an arhat. He was actually already fully enlightened at the time. And so, but he said he was a beginner because he hadn't been a monk for very long. So he was still had that humility, is very humble. So there's all these qualities the Buddha talks about in the suttas, and these are all qualities that, when practiced, when cultivated, they lead to peace, lead to well-being, lead to happiness. And when we talk about meditation, or we're doing a day-long retreat, then we tend to talk about the 5 hindrances to meditation. And so all of the qualities the Buddha talks about in the suttas can be used for overcoming the 5 hindrances, these qualities of generosity, humility. Longpo Liam, actually, he's Ajahn Chah's Dhamma disciple. He's the current abbot of Wat Nong Papong in Thailand. He's like our mothership monastery. And sometimes I say Longpo. Longpo means venerable father in Thai. So it's a very respectful term in Thai. Actually, I should say Longpo Cha as well. And Longpu Man. Longpu means venerable grandfather. So these are terms. This is part of our monastic jargon here in the Thai forest tradition. So Longpo Liam, he traveled to China one time, got invited to go to China, and he got invited to visit Shaolin Monastery. And so sometimes people will equate us with Shaolin monks and think we practice Kung Fu here at Abhayagiri, which we don't, although some of the monks, some people here probably did practice Kung Fu before. Mostly it's Qigong and yoga here. But Shaolin Monastery, they practice Kung Fu, and so sometimes people can be critical of that. Oh, monks shouldn't be practicing karate. And when Longpo Liam was asked about it, what do you think, Longpo, about monks practicing martial arts? And Longpo Liam said, oh, it's good for going against the hindrances, such as drowsiness, and it brings up energy, or restlessness. It brings a sense of focus. So good for going against the hindrances. And of course, also this was a response to the particular person who asked, who was being critical of the Shaolin monks. He wanted to cut through that negativity and bring them back to a sense of positivity. The hindrances, we go through them one by one. The first one is sensual desire, sense desire. So when we're in a meditation retreat, we tend to try to bring the mind inwards, not flowing out, but actually bringing it in, but also not too hyper-focused inwards. I like the imagery of the Anapanasati Sutta, where the Buddha says, legs crossed, sitting with back straight, mindfulness at the fore. So it's almost physical, like mindfulness is in front of you. It's not too outwardly focused, and it's also not too inwardly focused, because if we get too inwardly focused, then we get hyper-obsessed with our mental states, and we aren't actually that mindful. We aren't paying attention to in front of us, so we don't want the focus too far in either. But we're actually cognizant of what's happening around us, and we're cognizant of what's happening inside of us. And so the sensual desire, that is sense desire, which is desire of the eye, sees visual forms, and so there can be desire for forms. The ear hears sounds, there can be desire for sounds. The nose smells scents, there can be desire for good smells, good scents. The taste, the tongue contacts taste, so there can be desire for good taste. The body contacts tactile sensations, so there's a desire for comfort of the body, not wanting it too hot or too cold, wanting the body to be very comfortable. And then the mind contacts thoughts, mental objects, and so there's that desire for good mental objects, good ideas, delight in good ideas, planning. That would be the desire for, that's also classed as a type of sense desire. So, as it's said, both in the Anapanasati Sutta and in the Satipatthana Sutta, relinquishing or letting go of covetousness and grief in connection with the world, and the world meaning those six sense bases, that is the world in the Noble One's dispensation, is the six sense bases and their objects that's classed as the world. So without desire or sadness, without longing or dejection, without covetousness and grief for the world of the sense bases, one sits legs crossed, back straight, mindfulness at the fore. Ever mindful, one breathes in, ever mindful, one breathes out. That's the beginning of the teaching. So it's very ordinary and very plain in the beginning. It's very plain, very ordinary, and we can just bring mindfulness to the fore. So there's a sense of alertness, upright, alert, yet relaxed at the same time. Second hindrance is what we call biyapada in Pali. It means ill will or anger, and this is a big hindrance. So the mind, the imagery the Buddha uses is the mind is like boiling water. When there's ill will or anger, more specifically desire for harm, desire to harm, or a strong desire to get rid of someone or something that's making me angry. So biyapada. So that can be calmed through a reflection on goodwill for ourselves. And by the way, very common, we can have anger for ourselves as well, so that's also to be relinquished. Sometimes we have to get really creative in the reflections we use for overcoming anger, overcoming resentment. For myself, a couple days ago, I was at a monastic picnic in Humboldt County, and there was the cutest little baby boy there. And so when I think of him, I can't possibly get angry when I think of this kind of chubby baby face. And so that's one way, that's one skillful means, one way to try to not be angry or to overcome our anger. We can think of cute baby faces, if that's helpful, or we can think of goodwill, cultivating goodwill for ourselves, or if we have a friend who's very dear to us, or a cat who's very dear to us, or a dog who's very dear to us, we can think of them, and we can't possibly feel angry when we're thinking of them. So coming up with skillful ways to overcome anger, overcome resentment. Then there's the third hindrance of tina mitta, which is translated as sloth and torpor. So one reason why it's good to give talks after meals is, for myself, I can get drowsy after meals sometimes, and so if I give a talk, I'm less likely to get drowsy. Also, if I drink some coffee, I'm less likely to get drowsy. So sometimes that's needed. Sometimes certain types of medicine might be needed. But also we can brighten the mind. So when the Buddha talks about overcoming tina mitta, he talks about cultivating a bright mind, a luminous mind filled with light. And the way we develop the perception of light is we think, as by night, so by day, as by day, so by night, I cultivate a luminous mind. So that can actually be done in terms of visualizing light in the mind, can be helpful for keeping oneself awake, overcoming that sloth and torpor. Or one can actually do some sort of chanting, recitation of the teachings, such as the Mangala Sutta, which I chanted in English at the beginning of this daylong. And when the mind is stuck in sloth and torpor, the Buddha likened the mind to a pond with weeds, with pond weeds growing in it. So it's murky, it's not clear. There might be a slight sense of fuzzy ease, but it's not clear happiness, it's not clarity, joy won't arise in that state. So that's a hindrance to mental well-being. Then restlessness is the fourth hindrance. So restlessness is an interesting one because though the Pali is uducha kukucha, which literally means like fretting and worrying. Uducha is like fretting and kukucha is worrying. And so how do we overcome fretting and worrying? And the Buddha just prescribes anapanasati to that. We can take deep breaths, taking long breaths in, long breaths out. So we can do some pranayama, some breath exercises. If the mind is just running all over the place, or if we're having what's generally called a multiple hindrance attack, where all the hindrances are just assailing us, assaulting us, then we could take some deep breaths in, deep breaths out. We can do some breath holds. That can be helpful. But also, we can take heart that uducha kukucha as a hindrance, it doesn't actually disappear completely until arhantship. So it's always going to be present as a latent tendency in some way, shape, or form until the very end of our practice, whenever that may occur. So for now, it's normal to have it. We shouldn't be too hard on ourselves. Sometimes the mind can be running all over the place, can be restless, and we can try to use a tactic of crushing it down or telling it to stop or being mean to it. But we have to be nice to our mind. We have to be gentle to our mind. Maybe thinking of baby faces can also help with this hindrance. Being nice to ourselves and just taking some deep breaths in, some deep breaths out, and just allowing the mind to settle in its own time. Because if we're harsh with ourselves, then that'll just increase the restlessness of the mind. Or we try to crush the mind down, the mind tends to then rebel, or we try to squeeze the mind in our fist, then it tends to leak out between the fingers. And so Ajahn Chah Longpo Chah had a good analogy for this. He said when you meditate, you have to treat the mind like a little baby bird. And when you're holding a little baby bird, so if you hold it in your hand, if you just let go completely, then it'll just fly away. So if we just let our mind go completely, we don't try to control it at all, then it'll just fly away to wherever. But if we crush it in our hand, trying to keep it still, it'll die, and it'll or at the very least be injured. So if we try to crush our mind or try to clamp down on our thinking mind, trying to make it still, trying to make it peaceful, then it'll be tense, it'll be tight, it'll be suffering. So the way to do it is that you hold the baby bird just loose enough that it can stick its beak out of your fingers and it can move around a little bit, it can hop around a little bit, but it can't fly away. And also, it's comfortable enough that eventually it calms down and just starts resting in your hand. It won't try to get out after a period of time. So Luang-Por Chah would say to meditate, treating the mind like a little baby bird that you're holding in your hand. So you hold it not too tight, not too loose. Try to get it just right. The mind will be comfortable, and then it can start to settle down a little bit. The last of these 5 hindrances to meditative stillness, meditative peace, is doubt. The Pali for that is vicikiccha. So doubt is like vacillation, not sure what to do in the moment, not sure about the teachings, are they true or are they not true, not sure about ourselves, can I do it, can I not do it, perplexed. The Buddha used the word perplexed. He said, one who has the hindrance of doubt is perplexed about wholesome and unwholesome states. Well, maybe I'm not doing it right. Maybe actually this is unwholesome. Maybe I should be going out in the world and doing something right now. Maybe I'm wasting my time. Why am I doing this day-long retreat? Maybe it's just not going to have any benefit for myself or for others. Maybe the teachings are all wrong. Maybe Buddhism doesn't exist. Maybe some other religion is better. So doubt, vacillation, wavering, and then the Buddha said this is like muddy water in the dark, is the analogy for that. So doubt is quite a hard one to overcome because we think we'll be able to think our way to the end of doubt. So doubt is looking for answers. It wants to know, it wants to pin things down, but then it never can. Once it thinks it's pinned something down, it's got another question, it's got another doubt. So the function of doubt is to doubt endlessly. It never stops. So even if we think we've found the answers, we haven't. The doubt is still there. And so what we need to do with doubt is actually see it as doubt, that's the doubting mind, and then convince ourselves that it's okay for things to be uncertain. It's okay for things to be unknown. Or even just telling ourselves it's okay. Because the doubting mind, it's actually usually when we fall prey to the doubting mind, it ends up causing problems in our lives. And if we doubt too much or we overthink a situation, sometimes, a lot of the time, I find we end up making the wrong decision or a decision that's not helpful. So doubt is, in a way, it's kind of like the opposite of intuition. So seeing doubt as doubt, and it's okay for things to be unknown. It's okay for it not to be pinned down. It's okay for it to be uncertain. Things are good enough right now. I'm comfortable enough right now. I'm here, breathing. Everything's okay. So one relinquishes doubt and uncertainty. And really, it takes that courage just to relinquish it, just to set it aside. It's a really common hindrance. I would say doubt is probably the biggest hindrance to meditation for most people, whatever nationality. So when these 5 hindrances are set aside, the Buddha gives the analogy of still water, that when the 5 hindrances are set aside, they're like, your mind is like still, clear, pure, cool water. And you can see fish swimming around in the water. You can see the bottom. You can see the pebbles and rocks on the bottom. You can see everything in vivid detail because it's still, pure, clear, cool water. And the Buddha also went on to say that these 5 hindrances are obstructions of mind that hinder wisdom. They hinder wisdom from arising. So doubt hinders wisdom from arising. Restlessness hinders wisdom from arising. Worry hinders wisdom from arising. Drowsiness, anger, sense desire, all these things hinder the wisdom from arising. So when we can set them aside, though, we can see clearly. And that clear water, the clear mind, and then we're able to see the Four Noble Truths, We're able to see the way suffering arises. There's the little blips in the mind, and we're able to see how that comes up. So the relinquishing of those 5 hindrances helps us to have a clear mind, to be able to see clearly. Helps the mind to be light, happy. Now, also, it's good to know that there is the body and there is the mind. So the body is never going to be completely still. So we're thinking about wanting to settle the mind, wanting to have the mind be peaceful, wanting to have the mind be happy. And then there's the body. So no matter how still the body is, we still have a heart beating, our blood is flowing. There's always that movement, just completely inherent in the body. So to try to cultivate that attitude that doesn't have to be a disturbance. That's just the nature of the body, to be in constant motion as a living form, as a living body. There's constant motion inside of it. And also when we talk about stilling the mind or making the mind clear, we want to be clear that it is not about stopping thinking. We don't need to have thinking stop for the mind to be peaceful. So the mind can continue thinking, but in a way that it's like that little bird pushing its beak out of little openings, but it's got some sort of anchor. We've got the feeling of the breath, taking deep breaths in, deep breaths out. And we've got the body as an anchor. The Buddha recommended focusing on the body, mindfulness of the body, and it can be done in a full body way. The focus doesn't need to be like a laser focus on the tip of the nose, for example. My own interpretation of Anapanasati is that mindfulness of the body it can be like the awareness can be moving throughout the body during the meditation. It doesn't have to be clamped down and laser focused on one tiny little point in exclusion to everything else. I don't think that's what the Buddha was teaching. And I've tried those types of practices and haven't found it so useful. The mind ends up tight and agitated. So allowing the focus to go throughout the body, considering this bodily form, feeling its weight on the ground, sitting on the ground, feeling where it might have aches and pains, feeling where it might be comfortable. Coming back to the feeling of the breath. So rather than laser focus on a certain point with our awareness, we allow the awareness some movement. And that's like that little bird being able to move a little bit. Then it's just going to naturally kind of calm down. And we set that intention of ease and well-being. Setting the intention of not trying to get anything special out of the meditation, but just to see clearly. That's all we're aiming for, is just seeing clearly. We're not trying to see any one particular thing, but we're just trying to have clear awareness of the way things are. So at this point, if we could continue sitting for about another 30 minutes or so, and then I'll ring the bell and we can take a brief bio break. After that, we'll transition into walking meditation. From there on, we'll do some sitting and walking until about later in the afternoon. We'll have a question and answer, so we could continue with our sitting meditation now. we'll take a 5-minute break and then we'll come back and do some walking meditation. And after the walking meditation, we'll go with the walking meditation until about 2:30. So now we have a period of walking meditation, which I'll give a little bit more instruction or perhaps inspiration to do walking meditation. I'll wait for a couple more minutes as people return from the bio break. So just briefly, the methodology of walking meditation, mentally reciting Butto, But with the right foot, toe with the left foot, But with the right step, toe with the left step, and when we turn around, then taking a breath, and then continuing the walking. And walking meditation by some of the forest ajahns would be done even more than sitting meditation, so it is a valid form of meditation. And even in the suttas, there's the 5 benefits of walking meditation, a few of which are food digests better, one can walk long distances, whatever mental clarity and stillness one attains, that lasts for a long time. So there are these various benefits to walking meditation. And we tend to walk slightly slower than we might walk in our daily life. Generally, the eyes are downcast, they say, looking about a plow's length in front of one. And then when you walk back and forth in this way, this is chankama, which just means in Pali, walking back and forth. And the Buddha was known to even practice this, do this particular practice. And when you walk back and forth long enough, it really can settle into a valid form of meditation. But it's a little bit more difficult to absorb into it at first. And we can keep generally the hands can be clasped loosely in front of one. Or if it's more comfortable or you have some sort of pain or something in the shoulders, you can clasp the hands behind the back as well. It's also valid. Or if your mind is too tense, too tight, also the arms can dangle at the sides, just if you don't want to add to that tightness in any way. So these are all valid ways to do walking meditation. Okay, now we're going to sit for 1 hour. And for those of you who maybe don't sit that often, then feel free to change positions during the sit if it gets painful. So we'll go to about 3:30, and then we'll transition to another 30 minutes of walking meditation. And after that will be the Q&A. have another 5-minute break, followed by about 20 more minutes of walking meditation. Okay, we'll wait for a couple minutes for everyone to come back and then see if there was any questions. Okay, so yeah, we have about 20 more minutes, 25 minutes or so for questions. So I'll ask one of our co-hosts, JD, to read them out if there were any. Or one at a time.
Yes, thank you. We had a couple of questions about walking meditation, so I'm going to combine them. One of the questions was about Budo. What the translation of Budo? I think I'm going to mute you because I'm hearing some echo. So the translation of Budo, and then also the 5 benefits of walking meditation. So you could repeat those.
Okay. So the meaning or the translation of Buddho, and then the 5 benefits of walking meditation. And I don't have the 5 benefits memorized or on hand all the time in my mind. So I do remember 3 of them, which is you digest your food well, and you can walk on a long journey, and also any samadhi, any concentration you attain during walking meditation lasts for a long time. So those are, I think the other 2 benefits are something like what Dhamma that you don't know yet arises, and Dhamma that you have that has already arisen for you, or insights that have arisen for you already are maintained, something like that. And the meaning of Buddho is Buddha, and it's the Buddha's name, so you're reciting the Buddha's name, you're just reciting Buddha, but Buddho is the Thai way of saying it. And I like to think of Buddho, my own personal interpretation that's useful for me is that Buddha is like outside Buddha, and then Buddho is the inner Buddha, so you're recollecting the inner Buddha, which is the knowing. So it's just knowing what's arising in the moment, knowing the way things are, not interpreting the way things are, but just knowing how things are in the moment. So Buddha is Buddho is the knower. That's the translation. It really is just 2 syllables for helping to be an anchor for the mind, so it can be any 2 syllables. I know different monks have used like let go, let go. So you can do that as a two syllables, or you can do Dhammo, which is like Dhamma, or you can do Sangho. So all of those are valid, or you can find two syllables that are pertinent to you. And one Ajahn at Wat Papong in Thailand, he even said, yeah, any two syllables will work, even Pepsi, Pepsi, Pepsi. So if that works for you, then you can choose whatever works for you, whatever two syllables will be good. Yeah, so question being around more daily activity type stuff in the suttas. Does it come up? Yeah, certainly. Certainly there are a lot of teachings around daily activities. This comes up in the teachings on sati sampajanya, where every daily activity you try to have mindfulness and awareness, and clearly aware of what one is doing. So in the Satipatthana Sutta, the Four Foundations of Mindfulness Sutta, the Buddha talks about extending and contracting your limbs. So like stretching or daily stretching activities is how I kind of interpret that, like while we're doing yoga in the morning or whatever, being mindful and fully aware of what one is doing, whether eating or speaking, keeping silent, even using bathroom facilities, being clearly aware and mindful of what one is doing. Walking, the teachings on the postures, there's sitting, walking, standing, or lying down, being clearly aware of what one is doing. So you're just cultivating presence, we could say embodied awareness in any activity, whatever we're doing. And we know, we don't lose ourselves. So mindfulness is when you don't lose yourself and you don't lack awareness in what you're doing. There are different chores that took place in the monasteries, even in the time of the Buddha, things like sweeping. So sweeping is a really big one in the Thai forest tradition. There are monasteries where sometimes they'll even sweep many hours a day, and some monks even will make determinations that they'll just sweep all day, and that's their whole practice, is just sweeping the trails and sweeping the leaves off of the roads. There's even stories in the suttas of monks sweeping. There's a story of the monk Chulapantaka, who his mind wasn't very strong. He couldn't even remember a single verse of teaching, so he wasn't able to reflect on the teachings because his mind was very slow and he was unable to memorize even a single verse. So the Buddha had him sweep the grounds and when he was sweeping, he had to recite to himself, clearing away dirt, clearing away stains. And that was his whole practice, and he was at least able to memorize that within the context of sweeping, and then eventually he attained enlightenment while sweeping. So sweeping is a big one in the Thai forest tradition. And so, yeah, we can also cleaning. Cleaning is really praised a lot. Cleaning our meditation space, cleaning our shrine, even on a daily basis, making fresh offerings to, if we have a shrine in our home, making fresh offerings to it even on a daily basis can be a wonderful practice. It's a known feature of the biography of all of the Dalai Lamas in Tibet that they swept their meditation rooms so much they would wear their brooms down to nothing. And these brooms have been kept in museums. They're just worn down. The bristles are worn down to nothing because they would do this themselves. They wouldn't have somebody else do it for them because it was part of their practice. So they would make a point of doing it themselves. So Ajahn Chah would talk about sweeping quite a bit. He would talk about how you can actually attain a lot of insight while sweeping. So walking meditation and sweeping are two big hallmarks of the Thai forest tradition. Also, coming back to walking meditation a little bit, that there's certain ajahns like Longpo Phut in Thailand. He was a senior disciple of Longpo Mun. He was known to do walking meditation 16 hours a day, just to give you an idea of how much some of these ajahns did walking meditation. And he did walking meditation so much that, so it's on outside of his hut, monk's hut we call kuti. Outside of his kuti, there's a dirt walking meditation path, and he walked meditation until it was turned into a ditch, and then the novices would come and fill it in for him and pack it down, and then he would walk meditation so much it would turn into a ditch again. And so he did it to that extent, and he's known to have attained insight very quickly in his practice of just doing walking meditation. So, and sometimes these famous Thai forest monks, the way they practice, they would even do walking meditation and then just lie down on their walking meditation path and go to sleep. And then when they woke up, they would just continue doing walking meditation. So sometimes they would practically live on their walking meditation path. And yeah, sweeping is a wonderful practice. The trails look really good, so it brightens the mind when you see the trails all clean. Sometimes people do that here at Abhayagiri. They'll sweep or rake the trails. One monk here, I know for a period of time, he would sweep the trails for 5 hours straight, and then all the trails would be clean, and everybody enjoys having clean trails. We've got a road that we can use these big brooms where we do big sweeping motions with these big Thai-style brooms that you can sweep the road with, or we've got smaller brooms you can sweep the trails with. And now we've got blowers as well. Sometimes if we want to get them extra clean, we can go around blowing the trails, but that's it's still work to do that, so it can still, it still can be, using a blower is perfectly valid, although we don't want to use it. They are allowed, so you don't want to use them around monks' kutis if people are meditating in the afternoon. So yeah, these different practices are very important. Cleaning, mopping, some of these famous training monasteries in Thailand, they have standards in the toilets to the point that they say you could eat off the floor in the toilet room because they're so clean, where you're supposed to wash your feet before you go in, and then you can use the toilet area, but then you're supposed to make sure there's no splash marks or anything anywhere. There's a rag in there for drying up splashes, and you're supposed to actually, there's one monastery which is famous for how clean they keep their toilets, and you're supposed to actually back out of the toilet room while wiping your footprints away, and then sort of reach in and hang the rag back up without walking back in. So it's like sometimes they just have these incredible standards around cleanliness, and it has a practical application too, that you don't spread disease because you're keeping it super clean and sanitary. And so we can actually make these things our practice. Also, bowing is a big practice, not just in the Tibetan tradition, but also in the Thai tradition. There's just tons of bowing. And when we come into the hall, we bow. Bowing as a cultivation of mindfulness, establishment of mindfulness. And bowing when we leave, like first thing in the morning, waking up, bowing to our shrine, bowing before we leave our kuti to come down for morning chanting, bowing at the beginning and end of morning chanting, bowing when we, say, enter a room or enter a space. So we have a lot of bowing, and each bow, if it's done mindfully, can be like a little drop in the bucket of our cultivation of barami, cultivation of spiritual qualities. So rather than being just a ritual that we do, it's actually something we put effort into, and it reminds us to put forth effort and cultivate mindfulness. So bowing, sweeping, cleaning the toilets, all of these things can be great daily activities. And even in this, and a lot of this is in the suttas, they call the Vacha Kuti Vata is the protocols around cleaning the toilets. That's in the Vinaya. It's actually in the suttas from the time of the Buddha. You have protocols around how to clean the Buddha goes into, and a lot of this is in the Vinaya, not actually in the Nikaya, not in the the Majjhima Nikaya, Digha Nikaya, and so on. It's actually in the Vinaya, and you can actually read about this if you go onto Access to Insight website and see the Buddhist Monastic Code, Volume 1 and 2, and a lot of these things are translated, but they are canonical. They are from the time of the Buddha. So there's the Senasana Vata, which is the protocols around cleaning your kuti, and it's so detailed that it gets into take the bed out, take the chair out, take it outside, dust off your foot wiping mat, wipe down the floor with a damp rag. If there's any mold on the walls, wipe the mold off. If there's any spider webs, dust them away. Bring the furniture back in, bring the chair back in, bring the bed back in. Sweep the veranda, sweep around the kuti. So it's very detailed. And then it says during the hot season, open your windows at night and close them during the day. During the cold season, open your windows during the day and close them at night. So it's talking about regulating the temperature in your dwelling place. And it's just very practical. So it's all there. So there is quite a bit. The Buddha was really into that kind of thing. What was the first one again? Grief for the world, covetousness and grief for the world. So the world is the 6 sense bases according to the Buddha. So there's these different places in the suttas and the teachings, especially in the Samyutta Nikaya, where monks will come up to the Buddha and ask him about a term. So there's one place where there's a monk who comes up to the Buddha and says, the world, what is the world? And the Buddha says it's this 6 sense bases, and their objects is the world in the Noble One's discipline. So he says the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind, and their objects, and that's the world in terms of practice. But then for us also the world is the world as the earth, as in the world as a whole and all this geopolitical everything. So that's also the world as we think about it. So covetousness, setting aside covetousness and grief for the world, and it can be hard to do, and it's like setting aside all these things we might watch in the news or whatever, trying to set that aside so we can calm our mind down a little bit. So that's a perfectly valid way of thinking about it as well. Or like the pandemic, as it's been playing out for the last few years, we might feel like very, very saddened or upset about it, or about the responses to it, or about disagreements about it. So we might feel frustrated and irritated and saddened, and might have a lot of grief around people who might, there might be disagreements about the nature of the pandemic or the nature of what's a skillful way to respond to it. So, and yeah, it is very valid. In a way, it's actually, these teachings become more vividly valid and apparent in a time like this, where it's like, yeah, you roll that all into a big ball, and it's a big ball of suffering, and then we do have to be able to drop that, set that aside in the moment, because we have to be able to see with wisdom that things like grief and frustration aren't going to help the situation. It is an understandable response or reaction to the situation, but as practitioners, we do have to see that those mental states don't bring any benefit to the situation. So I like to think of the phrase like certain inspiring phrases to respond to situations like this, like to cultivate goodness inside oneself against all odds. So cultivating goodness against all odds. So we might have all sorts of negativities or negative things flying our way, negative bits of information flying our way through the airwaves or through what people are telling us or whatever. And we just have to be able to cultivate positivity against all odds, and that can be one way to relinquish, say, grief in relation to the world. And as to the second part, how it has affected the monastic community, in a way, it's been good. It's been very mixed. So when we first closed down back in April, May of 2020, there was a lot of disagreements about what was the best response to the pandemic, or whether to go along with the lockdowns, or whether to be aloof from them and keep going alms around and whatnot. So in the end, we're supported by the lay people, so whatever thoughts we have about it, we do have to kind of surrender to the thoughts of the people who support us. So it's kind of like feeling our way forward and trying to do the right thing based on what our supporters want us to do. So we ended up closing down for a while, and then that was kind of great actually, because as monastics we sort of lead quiet lives anyway, so it just got quieter and became like a period of retreat for us. And still the support was amazing. People still brought food and supported us incredibly well, so we're incredibly grateful for that. And then over time, we, as things developed, eventually back in last April, we did decide to take a chance and open up completely with no sort of mandates or anything in the monastery. And that's gone incredibly well. And with the caveat that if anything bad happened, we could close down again. But that hasn't happened. In the 3 years, we've only had 2 people now test positive for COVID in the monastery. There have been other community members who have gotten it, but not in the monastery. So in the monastery, only 2 people, and they were both guests. They weren't monastic community members. And they were, and then as soon as they tested positive, they were sick or whatever, we just had them go back to their dwelling place, and then we would put out food for them, and they were just separate from everybody, and seemingly nobody else got it. Or if they did, they didn't get sick. Nobody else tested positive. So yeah, we've been very fortunate, and mostly we live outside. And even in this hall where I'm sitting right now, it's very well ventilated and has a system where it pulls air from the outside and pushes old air out all the time. It's got a very good HVAC ventilation system. So we've been incredibly fortunate. So it's been a learning process. We're kind of a microcosm of the world, so it's not that everybody in the monastery agrees about what's the best thing to do or whatever, but the Dhamma has gotten us through. I had this feeling since the beginning that the Dhamma would be the only way through, it's not about choosing the right response or the right view about what the pandemic is, or whether to be vaccinated or not, but it's more about using the Dhamma to be in harmony. And I had that sense since the beginning, and it is really the case that I can see that having used the Dhamma to see it according to Dhamma, see things according to, well, everything's not sure, and also this idea of preservation of truth. Like I might have some idea about the pandemic, or about the nature of it, or about what's happening in the world, but then it's like, well, Ajahn Chah always taught not sure, like whatever I think about it, that's just my thoughts, so I just have to say, well, that's actually not sure. And then that, when I say to myself, oh, my thoughts and opinions are not sure, then it's much easier for me to harmonize with a wide variety of people and a wide variety of views, and have empathy for a wider variety of people. And that's made it a very good learning process. Another thing I could say about that is, since I've been taking up the abbotship here at Abhayagiri, part of me was like, why did I have to become an abbot during this period of time, like literally the most difficult time in history to take on a new leadership position like this, like very difficult time to be a leader. And I was kind of developing a bit of resentment, like why did I have to do this now? Like, why couldn't they wait till the pandemic passed and then make me the abbot or something like that? But it just happened that way. But then during it, that view shifted to, actually, this is the best time. This is the best time actually for the cultivation of wisdom and developing qualities like patience and discernment and things like that, that this is actually the best time to take on something like this, if I can use it skillfully, if I don't cave in to, the whatever difficulties might arise. If I can face them head on and stay positive, then it's actually the best time for cultivating wisdom and bringing people together and cultivating harmony and being able to have empathy for a wide variety of people. So all in all, I would say it's been good for the monastic community. Maybe time for one more question. Probably mindfulness, because I've spoken quite a bit about walking already. Yeah, maybe you could just repeat it so I could understand it better. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so mindfulness, there's also this quality of of clear awareness known as sampajanya in Pali. So we don't just say sati or mindfulness, but we say sati sampajanya, mindfulness and clear knowing, mindfulness and clear awareness. And as far as dualistic thinking. It's a little bit beside the point. Mindfulness is more about, you just see it, but rather than try to stop it, it's more more than trying to stop the dualistic thinking. It's more about either not believing it or being able to say not sure to it, or just seeing it as it arises and passes away. And that's it's more like watching passing clouds in the mind. And it's also about having that intention of peace and well-being. So we might be able to stop our thinking sometimes, but we also have to pay attention to, is it peaceful, is it easeful when we stop our thinking? So sometimes the act of stopping the thinking isn't so peaceful. So it's more about not really reacting to it. Although that being said, it's not bad to come back to the meditation object of Buddho or the breath. That's always a good thing, to gently reestablish the attention on that, or at least let that be in the foreground and the thinking mind being in the background. So dualistic thinking is like opposites, good, bad, etc. But then you can also contemplate dualistic thinking sometimes and try to see, you can do more of an analytical meditation and try to see, why is that happening? So like tall, short, this whole idea of the opposites or dualisms, seeing through that is actually one of the core insights of Buddhism. And so like when somebody asked Ajahn Chah, a Westerner came and asked Ajahn Chah, what's the essence of Buddhism? And then Ajahn Chah picked up a stick that was about 6 inches long. He just picked it up off the ground and said, "Is this a short stick or a long stick?" That's the essence of Buddhism. And the guy was kind of not happy with that answer and said, that doesn't make sense. And so Ajahn Chah said, well, if you want a toothpick, it's a long stick. If you want to build a house, it's a short stick. That's the essence of Buddhism. And so he still didn't understand. He said, so it's, you're wanting. Wanting is what creates your reality. Wanting is what creates the dualism. And so that's what creates, if you want a toothpick, it's too long. If you want to build a house, it's too short. So the comparing mind is created through the wanting. And so that's why the Buddha said that craving is the cause of suffering, that tanha, that craving is the cause of suffering, because it's based on the wanting. Our whole reality is based on that, on what we want. And so that's a good way to maybe shift the focus to like looking at the wanting. Where is that coming from? It's we have a Abhayagiri Buddhist monastery. If you search that in YouTube, then that's our channel. Also, just to mention that hopefully there was something useful for all the questions that didn't get answered. But also, there's our Saturday night. Every Saturday night, we have a live streamed evening puja and Dhamma talk. So that's Ajahn Pasano giving the Dhamma talk this evening for anybody who wants to continue their daylong or tap in further later today. Can tap into the YouTube channel at 7 p.m. and chanting meditation followed by Dhamma talk. Yeah, that doesn't need to be requested. I was thinking to end with the sharing of merit, the dedication of merit. For anybody who has their own Abhayagiri chanting book, it's on page 33 of volume 1. Otherwise, you can just listen to it and let it wash over you. Now let us chant the verses of sharing and aspiration. Through the goodness that arises from my practice, may my spiritual teachers and guides of great virtue, my mother, my father, and my relatives, the sun and the moon, and all virtuous leaders of the world, may the highest gods and evil forces, celestial beings, guardian spirits of the earth, and the Lord of death, may those who are friendly, indifferent, or hostile, may all beings receive the blessings of my life, may they soon attain the threefold bliss, and realize the deathless, through the goodness that arises from my practice, and through this act of sharing, may all desires and attachments quickly cease, and all harmful states of mind, until I realize Nibbana in every kind of birth. May I have an upright mind, with mindfulness and wisdom, austerity and vigor. May the forces of delusion not take hold, nor weaken my resolve. The Buddha is my excellent refuge. Unsurpassed is the protection of the Dhamma. The solitary Buddha is my noble guide. The Sangha is my supreme support. Through the supreme power of all these, may darkness and illusion be dispelled. Bruce and Jill, did you have any closing words?